Okay, welcome everyone. Apparently, I'm going to be moderating this panel, which I found out 10 seconds ago. But anyway, there's going to be no moderation, obviously, because...
Please read the title.
Yeah. DAO roles and hierarchy, everybody, welcome. Well, I'm very glad to have here this brilliant group of people. All right, so Squads, Grape, and Realms all together, and I'm from the Unique Venture Clubs, and we're going to be discussing the roles. Right? Because obviously it's an important topic, jokes aside. We've been talking about it extensively before and during this conference and so on. So now finally, I guess it's the time to extend this conversation beyond this smaller circle of people and try to figure out what are the roles in the first place in the DAO system, in the DAO universe. Why are we mentioning hierarchy at all if it's a decentralized and autonomous organizations, right? Because obviously there is this degree of necessity for some sort of structure, some sort of hierarchy. So let's try to dive deeper into that and see, what can be done and what can be used and what shouldn't be used potentially as well. So let's start with, trying to define what are the roles in the first place. And I guess Grape has a lot of, experience in that to start with, because we've been trying to introduce and successfully introducing that in the Grape community for quite some time. So what's your take on roles?
Okay, thank you so much. So happy to be here among friends and like-minded people. So the way that we try to tackle roles in hierarchy in Grape was basically came organically while trying to figure out where the buck stops. So there needs to be made a decision for something in order for an action to be taken by the DAO or a smaller group, the sub-DAOs. So whenever the need comes up for a person or a group of persons that later might evolve into a sub-DAO of their own to complete an action, that's how we look and define a role. So we don't start by thinking out beforehand what kind of roles do we need to have, but we try to have our roles defined by the tasks that come before us in the process of conversations and what we are trying to achieve. So, for instance, when we started organizing events for the community, like poker, Warzone, and all that, we saw the need that we have to have organizers, and the organizers have to be responsible for, let's say, a particular game. So in time, we had organizers that did poker, we had organizers that did Fantasia, and so on and so forth. So when the event comes, the organizer needs to have somewhere to request a flyer so that we can communicate and promote the event. So that turned out to be the role of the designer, because the designer has to be called upon and asked to create this request, to complete this request. So that way we kind of evolve in having different roles around up to even having a voice actor in Grape. So this is very interesting to me because we didn't have to sit down and think, okay, from top to bottom, we start with these guys in the top, these guys in the middle, and these guys left and right. So we try to, the needs of the actions that we're trying to take lead us organically to the creation of the roles and the hierarchy behind them.
Thanks. And basically, Squads was the very beginning how Squads became popular in the Solana ecosystem was because so Squads and sub-squads, right? So you kind of rolled out with this idea from the very beginning. How did you come up with that? Why did it come out naturally for you?
The idea was kind of we see a lot of DAOs sort of embracing early on kind of what we talked about this morning as well. The sort of spirit of DAOs is kind of always about, as it initially was about direct democracy, everybody participating, having sort of a flat structure, flat hierarchy, everybody's kind of on equal footing, kind of like what happened in Athens, I guess centuries ago, when people would kind of come to Agora, right, and just make decisions together. So I think that's kind of how it started, but we started seeing, I think with kind of on various chains, the same kind of problem that having a flat hierarchy leads to certain inefficiency, slowness, potentially decisions are not even get made, and just it's hard to coordinate a bunch of people sometimes. And so kind of the squad's idea was that you departmentalize. The idea was that you create this kind of smaller group, sub-DAOs that are, sort of divided by expertise or focus, and They act as sort of departments with the right sort of checks and balances in place. And we're still really early in realizing that vision, right? Like for now, we just decided to first focus on the what's the experience within each sub-DAO, right? Because it needs to be complete. And we're just now sort of also here in Athens with the Realms team, finally starting to connect the dots of how they match up with the larger organizations. And so I think we were particularly excited to do it on Solana specifically because you can actually create a lot more of these on-chain relationships on Solana than, for instance, on Ethereum due to sort of various cost and technical constraints. So that's why I think we're getting into this really exciting phase for squads, and I hope for the ecosystem as well, where you can verifiably on-chain actually establish these kind of complex relationships between sort of the larger DAO and the token holder base and the sub-DAOs that kind of exist within it. And so this is where finally we're getting, I think.
So what are Realms planning towards roles? And because again, there's been a discussion on that, but since you are also trying to introduce all those primitives, and I guess we are coming to a point where role also becomes sort of a primitive for DAO. How do you see roles in general?
I absolutely agree that roles are necessary because I think this is every DAO at certain size learns very quickly that governance is hard job. It's just, after the all excitement, the dopamines go down, you created your DAO, and now what, right? And then you quickly learn that you have to create proposals, you have to vote on them, and that's just chores, right? And certainly you cannot have the entire DAO to vote on every single decision that the DAO has to take, right? So you have to divide and conquer. And in order to divide and conquer, you have to decide the responsibility and roles, right? So who can do what? And for example, you can have somebody who can create proposals, then somebody who can manage treasury, essentially creates what I call this pockets of authority. And this is why, yes, roles I see as a fundamental component, and we are planning to do this as a core primitive in SPL governance. That's on the roadmap.
Okay, but do you guys see roles more of let's say responsibilities and obligations, or more like permissions, or a combination of both?
I think that for me, a role is just organizational unit. Because at the end of the day, what you need is permissions, right? So you can do this, you can do that, and then a role is just a collection of those permissions. And then so the way I'm thinking about this, we have to introduce those permissions, and then this is up to the DAO to define the roles, right? So because you can imagine that one DAO says, okay, you are like an admin and can do whatever you want. But in the other DAO, they say, okay, admin can, for example, create proposals, can create the process, but for example, cannot touch the treasury, right? So I expect that this will be decided by DAO specific. We know every DAO is different. So I think what we are trying, at least from the REMS point of view, on in particular SPL governance, to make it as DAO type, as asset type, as role type agnostic, right? So the idea is that we are providing the building blocks that you can build your DAO, your vision.
Yeah, but I guess it's also then it arises an interesting question. If we have those things permission-based, how do we call permission holders or role holders accountable, right? And I guess, again, it's mostly discovered in Grape case.
Yeah, accountability, it really comes down to self-policing. So we need to have tight-knitted groups like the sub-DAOs, and they form the greater DAO in parts and in total. So self-policing is a very, very important part of a DAO. You need to be able to have the courage, and of course within you that someone is not putting the same amount of work as the other guy, but you need to be courageous enough to express this, because if you don't, as a total, the whole team does not proceed and move accordingly, and it keeps everybody down. So you're only as strong as your weakest link. So we need to keep accountability based on self-policing. Look what's happening, and also try to apply metrics on the way. But this, we've seen that it's not very simple to to accommodate, to utilize. For instance, how do you apply KPIs, let's say, to a moderator? What does a good moderator, how is a good moderator defined? Is it from the help he extends to a certain channel on Discord? Is it by the setups he does for Grape Access? So certain roles and certain responsibilities that are very important, very essential, they cannot be easily measured. So we'll try to go through self-policing and hopefully weed out the weaker links and try to be stronger as we go and move forward.
Yeah, and then I guess like speaking of hierarchy again, we are like moving in all those cases kind of like, step by step. So we have like the whole DAO, then we have sub-DAOs, sub-squads, and potentially we have sub-squads within sub-squads, right? So what is there like, an idea for some sort of like chain of command from this perspective, right? On the code level?
I think on the code level, the furthest we've got so far is a hierarchy between DAOs and sub-DAOs, right? It's the idea that they should have, hierarchical relationship because the DAO is controlled by the token holders. They should be able to decide, I think, majority of those things. But I think, yeah, there can be a world where you can have like an HR squad, an HR sub-DAO that can actually control, for instance, just permissioning can control the roles, and that will affect, the other squads within the DAO. So that will create a certain hierarchy in a way. But I think like the first step that we're probably going to see is sort of that you have the DAO, and you probably don't have this kind of like a flat hierarchy of sub-DAOs kind of within it. They kind of all should answer to the token holders in the end. But I think, yeah, I mean, that's definitely possible. From the code level, though, I don't think anybody has expressed that because we're still at the kind of like the first step. But definitely, I can imagine it happening at some point. And as like I think like Sebastian said, our idea is that we need to provide the the right tools. Like kind of Realms is providing the full stack and the way for you to actually, I guess, define the roles, and we are kind of there to help codify them, right, and put them in certain frameworks. But I think the biggest job is on the sort of DAO operators and the token holders, right? Because like that's the hard part, right?
We want the job for you, right? You have to do it yourself.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but that's like the very important and interesting question for me as well, right? So a lot of DAOs has been created on top of a token, right? And now we are talking about roles and hierarchy, and there is a certain conflict potentially between those two things, right? So because right now whoever has the biggest token holding is the whale, and he is like sort of defining all the rules and can interfere with discussions and proposals and everything else, right? So now we say eventually there is a person who has a role that can override even a whale. Is that true? Like I would like to hear it from all three of you.
That's an interesting one. Definitely, the problem of definitely there is a problem with voting with a token which has economic value, right? I think there is no question about that because that favors whales, and that necessarily this is how it should be. And I haven't thought about roles as being the solution for that, but maybe there is something in this because. Yeah, I mean, definitely we have to empower more DAO members to do more things, right? And so it's not just the whales. Well, I don't know, but
yeah, because DAO is a very libertarian concept, but with a very capitalistic approach, right? So the richest guy potentially has lots of influence, and Sequoia put together like a fund, like $300-400 million, exactly to buy out governing tokens and influence decisions of DAOs, right? So, I mean, that's capitalism at its best, really.
Yeah, that's the thing. The most difficult part for any type of on-chain governance is to balance the flexibility versus the security, right? Because we can very easily create a structure when you can have governance attack and like steal all the assets from the DAO, right? And obviously that DAO will be very flexible. Like, you can say, okay, you have like 10% approval quorum, right? So you can get proposals in no time, but then somebody can attack you, right? Then if you set then your governance structure, like the rules too high, then you might, like people might not want to contribute. because they don't feel they have any vote, right? So those are difficult questions. And but I always say that whenever you create your DAO, you always have to, I think, set the parameters high to be safe, and then start from that level and try to think, can you make this more inclusive? Can you add more people? Can you add roles, right? So, but that's exploration, and that's, I think, like this is like evolution path for individual DAOs. They will have to find the things that works for them. This is why exactly like, in the SPL governance, the whole governance structure is a plugin, because this is the thing that I don't dare even think, like prescribe what it should be. I don't dare. This is why I think this is like the area of innovation that is needed, that we are not even close, right? We are trying like, the multi-sig NFTs, multiple token votes, like the V tokens, right? But I don't see any of them as the ideal solution yet. It's just, this is exploration.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely, the more secure you try to be, the less rigid, the less flexible you are. So you have, as Sebastian said, you have to start from security in order to not compromise your DAO, especially in its first footings. And as you move forward, you fine-tune that balance. So you try to be a little bit more nimble, but sacrificing a certain part of security in the way. And yes, we're still exploring and trying to find out what the best balance is. And it cannot always be the same. So even if we find it today, it might not work in a couple of weeks, couple of months. So this is always a dynamic relationship that you have to be able to grasp and try to sense within a DAO. So if need be, you need to adjust your security because it's above all, and be as nimble as you can in order to be functional.
Yeah, I think token voting in general, I think we talked about this yesterday as well, like has created issues, and there are different sort of ways to solve it. I do think, like, again, we are there to provide the on-chain tools. A lot of it is about just org design and managing your DAO internally, like having those procedures of how you make decisions and kind of thinking through them deeply. And I think, yeah, I mean, having sort of sub-DAOs and like delegated decision-making to like experts within the organization helps to, it kind of saves you from whale influence in a way, saves you from potential like, problems with like buying votes and stuff. But I do think that a lot of it, as we kind of always try to say, has nothing to do with, blockchains. It's more about just figuring out how you structure your organization, same as like different, traditional companies are facing that issue. I think as more DAOs are kind of growing, they're figuring out the same problem. And I think like for us, the best thing is, kind of DAOs like Grape, where they actually test a lot of stuff. They test different structures, they test different tools. Because I think, we'll build the tools, right? But we need definitely, more DAOs to come and experiment with them, experiment with different structures. So I think that's what I guess AthensDAO is also about, right? It's like promoting that idea, because we do need more, not just experiments on the tooling side, we need experiments on the sort of user side, which I think, yeah.
I fully agree. I don't feel like I'm building tools for you. It looks like I'm following you. Just, I'm learning from you, and then I'm trying to help you. This is how I think about it, right? Because it won't come from us, right? The DAOs have to figure out themselves, because everyone is different. And this is why I really love, what Grape is doing, right? I think AthensDAO, getting us together, I'm really grateful, right? Because, the Agora thinking is already so many cool ideas, right? I don't want to spill the beans, but just wait for the demo day.
Yeah, I mean, Grape definitely has been inspiration for everybody building anything DAO related on Solana, for sure, right? Because, yeah, you guys been experimenting so much with all those different models, and you exposed so many potential issues as well, right? That we were like, we couldn't even think about it, and we were looking at Grape and saying, okay, so this is the problem. Like, conversation about governance fatigue, right? And things like that. That eventually brought us as well to the whole idea, okay, we need roles from the get-go, really. So moving forward, okay, Grape is here, Grape is great. Grape is following their own model of sorts, trying to experiment with different stuff. And we are all experimenting, obviously, trying to provide different tools. But within these frameworks, let's say, that we are trying to introduce for now, like which of the three directions covered in the name of what we are doing do you think is taking the lead? Like, is it decentralized, is it autonomous, or is it about organizations?
That's a good question. I think like the easy answer is like every DAO decides for themselves, right? Like I do think, however, that there will be a kind of a good template as we kind of learn from experiences of different DAOs, that you probably need to prioritize one of those things in different sort of timelines of your development, right? Like at some point, like when you're starting out, it maybe helps that you're more centralized, right? Because you can get more things done. But I do think like, yeah, I think you need to prioritize all three, but then potentially in different times. And I guess the end goal, right, which is kind of maybe it's a utopia, we don't know, but is to get to a place where they're all three kind of existing in the, in the same proportion.
I don't like the word DAO. I prefer
Nobody does.
No, really, I think that we kind of unfortunately stuck with that name. And we are trying just to put many different things under the same umbrella. And then I see like, when like religious fights, what DAO is, what is not. I think that's just bad. But I mean, for now, we have no better name, and kind of everybody, it clicks. You say, this is DAO. And in fact, this is like, in realms, we didn't have the word DAO before. It was just all realms. So you created a realm, not a DAO. But then people were asking, okay, what's realm? And then we're explaining realm, you said DAO. Okay,
right.
Now it makes sense. So the decision was, okay, let's create DAOs.
Did you have this problem with squads? Sorry? Did you have this problem with squads as well?
Yeah, I mean, like it's always a problem to just understand like what's the messaging for these things, like how you name them, right? Because like it's really hard. Like it takes me a while sometimes to explain that a squad is not a DAO, right? Like it's a team level consensus layer focused on smaller groups making decisions together and managing stuff. And even that like still causes a lot of confusion. Like getting to that place with potential users or just people interested is a huge thing. And like it doesn't help that we constantly like there's new players in the space trying to kind of like say, okay, now this is a DAO. That like everybody's trying to say, okay, what we're doing is a DAO. And I just think like we all need to agree, kind of like what Sebastian says, like it should be a really vague and wide definition. I think this is how I also heard that XNFT guys now call it WOW or something, right?
Not that.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe let's touch a little bit. I don't know. Moving forward.
Can we hear about the unique roles?
Well, you can try.
This is what we come from here.
I don't know. Dean told me I have to moderate it, so I'm trying. Yeah. I mean, we like I said, we've came across this problem from the very beginning because we kind of wanted to have those clubs that can do things right in the first place. It's not about that much about like purely governing or whatever. It's about getting things done. So, like I said, Grape was a lot of help, showing those potential, weak points. So we introduced roles from the very beginning, basically, and they're going to be in the beta as well on public, on the DevNet and the mainnet, where you have founder role, you have member role, you have potentially manager role as well. But we are trying really to go, just like you're saying, right? No organization, even in the real world, is the same, right? They all have different rules, they all have different hierarchy, different processes, and so on. And even worse, they're evolving over time. What works for us today won't work for us tomorrow or in 20 years, right? 20 years we're at Google, and it's a completely different beast. So we are also not trying to enforce our vision, obviously, on anybody. We are trying to create tools that will help them achieve those goals, be operationally efficient, and potentially evolve over time.
And actually, that's like an interesting, because I think we deal with that more than like, for instance, Realms. The problem is like protocols need to be agnostic, products need to be specific, right? Yeah. And we're just trying to walk that balance where we're specific enough so you understand what you need to do, but you're flexible enough to do more things, right? So I think this is kind of what we've been dealing a lot lately with.
Yeah, and the problem is the users don't know as well, right? I know that's been a problem for you too. Like, people come to the squads. It's easy to set up, but what do I set up? I have no idea, right? I don't know what I need. I need an organization probably that is, governed by on-chain codes. That's great. But I don't know how my setup should look like. Who do I trust? Do I trust myself even at some point?
Is Club a DAO or not?
No, definitely not. I mean, let's be honest about it, right? Like you said, yeah, it's a club. In the end of the day, it's a group of people that have similar interests and want to also do something together, but mostly like in the venture area, right? Investing in something together, owning something together in the first place, right? Eventually, maybe selling it off, and that's it, right? But then it's simple when you start with it, but it's really hard moving forward because who decides what to buy, who decides what to sell? How do you do that efficiently as well, right? Because in many cases you can say, I want to buy something now. I have an NFT that I want to buy, and it can be gone in 10 seconds. Right, you can't really wait for everybody to come online and vote and so on. So we had to also separate this in different permissions from the very beginning and allow people to say, okay, in my club I do have significant power. I mean, not on the level of changing the rules or in discussions and so on, but I can spend 10 Sol from our common treasury without asking anybody, just because otherwise it won't take us anywhere. Right? We are not a venture anymore. We are, I don't know, just a bunch of people talking about something.
So you're just A and O from DAO.
Yeah.
But I think it's like, it's also about scale, right? Like it's about how big they're going to, like, Sam was talking about, if it's like if it's two or more people, you're, a general partnership, if you're pursuing a profit. I think we will end up in a couple of years, like with a bunch of similar, like delineations, right? Like if you're at that level, like if you have X amount of people, you're, investment club, you're a club. If you have more, you're a DAO, and then potentially something larger. So I think, I'm not sure if that's correct though, but I do imagine like, for kind of mass adoption, it helps to compartmentalize things into sort of concepts and structures. So I think we will end up there whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I mean, from some perspective, in order to encourage mass adoption, we need to deliver, our concepts to people in the terms they understand, right? So if you're going with like full-blown DAO, it's really hard. But if we say it's an organization that just can be more efficient because it's on chain, it's governed by law, and you don't need to go to the notary every goddamn time you want to change something or you want to vote something. And like for funds, for example, right? A lot of VC funds in Europe are incorporated in Netherlands, right? And that's why on Schiphol Airport you have so many meetings room, because LPs just come to the airport, sign something because they have to sign stuff on the Netherlands soil. Right, and where's the efficiency in that?
It's like this meme that DAO is just regulatory arbitrage, always has been, right? So it's kind of
Okay, so that's the bounty, a better name.
Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about it also a lot. Like it is an on-chain organization, but it's not a DAO. And at the end of the day, what is a DAO, right? And maybe there is a better way to. I mean, we ended up with clubs. You ended up with squads. You ended up with realms. And Grape is great. And, maybe there is a better way to describe what we are doing.
Just great.
Yeah, just Grape. And that's it. We all know what it is, right? You don't need any terminology attached to it, really. So potentially there is a better way to describe it. I mean, for me, it's just organization, right? And then it can become decentralized, autonomous, whatever. It's centralized. It's up to the organization in the end of the day.
Absolutely.
For me, if I had to play between these three words, if an entity wants to be sufficiently organized and pursue the goal to be autonomous, it has to be decentralized. So all these three things are in a dynamic balance among them. So you try to move them forward all the time, and little by little, each of these three components. So if in order to be autonomous, you don't have to rely on the same guy to, put forward the proposals. You have to inspire or bring out or find out, discover or attract new people to get things done.
Yeah, but that's again, this is exactly a good point, because then we are talking about roles, right? Because we are talking about roles from the perspective of creating more leaders in the industry, right? Decentralization. Somebody said that decentralization is not about anarchy; it's decentralization about bringing more leaders, creating more leaders, right? And that's where having this whole hierarchy in terms of DAOs. I'm sorry, I have to use this word. Makes sense, because then you have sub DAO, you spawn it because somebody is doing a good job. Let's give him some more authority.
And the question, I think I mentioned this yesterday as well, like decentralization is not really about whether, how sub DAOs are interacting between each other. It's also about how different members within the DAO can become members of those sub DAOs, right? Like if the funnels to get in there are actually decentralized, or is it just, two people actually making the decision? So I think that's something from the tooling perspective on Solana is not really captured at all yet, just because the first part is like the roles and the full kind of DAO setup is still quite early as well. But this is like a huge thing I think that we're going to see moving forward, is the idea of like, what are the gateways to becoming, somebody in the DAO, and how much, of that you can bring on chain, how much of those things you can verify. And I think that's something that we'll probably see in the coming year or so.
Yeah, and that's what we've been discussing as well. Moving between DAOs, right, and proving, that you've done something in one DAO, so you can be useful to the other DAO, and so on. And again, it's like role, but cross ecosystem role and reputation.
Yeah, and I agree that roles are the answer to decentralization and autonomous, right? Because you essentially empower people and trust them to do the right thing. And then once you create, again, those pockets of authority, you can start decentralizing, right? Because you can create more and more, but you need a system for that. Yeah, that's exactly. I fully agree with you. That's the essence of roles.
I don't know. I don't have any. I didn't prepare anything, obviously. So if anybody has any questions or any ideas, just like Dean said, let this be an open conversation, right? Please.
And can I actually ask, can I add to the question, probably to Sebastian, is it possible to do quadratic voting on-chain?
Do what, sorry?
Quadratic voting on-chain?
Yes.
Snapshot does it off-chain. I get how it's not there.
Yes, it is possible, but with quadratic voting, the problem are CBD attacks, right? Because if you can pretend to be more... Because the idea with quadratic voting is that your voting power diminishes with the amount of your power, right? But if you have nothing to prevent CBD attacks, where you can split your voting power into multiple wallets, there is really no point in doing quadratic voting, right? So this is, we're actually going to have, I don't want to spill the beans again before the demo, but if we have some way to identify that human is human and is the same person, then definitely quadratic voting is on the table. And this is really, I'm very, very excited about that development, because that can be a solution. And if this is not the quadratic voting, then I think probably this, it depends, it also depends if your token has economic value or not, right? What kind of governance structure we're talking about, right? Because you can think about, you can issue your own token that you cannot buy or sell, right? Then you approach this differently. And if the token has an economic value, then I would say probably the best you can do is the V-token style, when you lock your tokens and then you get governance power for the extra duration. You lock for 1 year, you lock for 2 years, and then you get more extra power, because that kind of, you have to prove that you have skin in the game. So it's more difficult to gain the system. Obviously, it doesn't solve the problem of whales, right? Because if you're a whale and you log for a very long time, you get even more governance power, right? But at least the incentives are aligned, right? So it's more safe in that sense.
Yeah, we're also thinking we have initially detached in the architecture governance from finances completely. So you can have, let's say, token-based governance. We don't issue your new token, but you can deposit some existing token, let's say Sol, and then one Sol is one vote for your particular club, right? But one of our next steps is to introduce like a combination of role and something, let's say tokens, where role is a multiplier of your voting power, right? So if you know that this person is accountable and he's active and he's actually doing something in your community, you can say, okay, your votes by your role have 10x power, right? Then the whale, right? Potentially can allow to balance that out. And the same with NFTs, for example, each NFT that you use to vote is 10 votes, not one. So again, we are experimenting with it, right? We're trying to give more tools to the people to work with and to figure out which governance, mixture of governments and finance model would work best for them, because it's like, you know, it's a very murky water.
So you mentioned the founder role, the manager role. Are there permission groups? You know, what are the different, you know, variables attached to each role type?
Yeah, for now they're like predefined roles, right? So basically a founder can whitelist new members, can create proposals, can veto proposals as well. Manager can create new proposals, and basically that's it, but he can operationalize like, you know, the whole day-to-day activity of the club, and then members can vote on them. But like next step is just what Sebastian said, right? Introduce custom roles where you have the whole set of permissions relative to the club in general or to particular treasury, and you can create a particular role that can do this, this, and this, and has this, and this votes on this, and this, right? So from the UI perspective, it's going to be probably a super ugly thing, all right? But on the other hand, you know, if somebody needs flexibility, we're going to give him that. If you know you want just to get something working, we're probably going to introduce a lot of templates for different cases.
I also have one question for all, you know, everyone. I think it's less relevant for Grape.
Or you know the answer.
No, it's definitely less relevant for us. Do you see, like, I don't know if you guys are collecting these stats, how often people change the defaults on like quorum or proposal threshold? Like, are you, you know, how much is it, are you influencing, you know, by what you've said as the default? Is that like do most squads use the default?
Well, we don't have the default, right? You set it when you create it. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like, I think,
like for the token voting, it's always a hunt, like unless you're giving different power.
For teams?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think we see that like maybe 20% of squads that are created actually want to change the parameters. I mean, with the multi-sig, obviously, as you add more people, that becomes relevant. But yeah, I think it's because mostly squads are used as multi-sigs, right? Like people want to use it for sort of self-custody as a team. So I think you kind of know what the team is. It's not really often that like it increases or decreases dramatically in membership. So I think we have it more stable just because it's not about like, you know, communities and sometimes when it deals with sub-DAOs, I guess, but I don't know, like if you guys change for the council, like the membership too many times, right? I think it's pretty stable. Like you kind of know what you want there. But yeah, I imagine for sort of realms, it's a lot more fluid.
The most common I see, like people said that the quorum is so high that they can't vote. They ask you, can we change it? I said, no. This is why I always start with the council. I mean, this is like, you know, if you're familiar with SPL governance, like the council is the safety net, right? Because you can get very easily the quorum wrong, right? And if you put any assets like tokens, NFTs, or whatever your DAO owns, and you set the governance parameters in a way that you cannot vote, it will be lost, right? I cannot do anything about that. I can help, right? So this is why we have the council, and really the job of the council is to find exactly the governance structure parameters, right? And this is what I see happens all the time. Usually this is what DAOs do. They take a very conservative approach initially to be secure, and then kind of get the taste of the community, how it engages, what's the participation rate, then usually it goes down, right? Like I think, I don't remember, like Mango started, it was like really, really high, so maybe, you know, like 10 people could create proposals. Now I think almost everybody can, right? Because they just get tired. and this is why they lower that. So I think generally the trend is start high, restrictive, very conservative settings, and then slowly adjust it to a level when more and more people can participate in governance.
And I think this is very interesting because, like, again, this is really unique to Solana because, like, Ethereum DAOs, they start with like off-chain voting, a separate multi-sig, and a Discord, right? And so by the time they get to on-chain voting, which is usually like the last step, everything is really clear, everything's figured out. There is no such issue that like, oh, if we set this too high and lock up the treasury, then that's it. And I think maybe it's because of, not just because of Solana, but because Mango from the start, right, wanted, like what Max said, wanted to do what sort of Compound did as well, where it's like fully on chain, program is controlled by the holders, everything. Maybe that's kind of set the trend for, Solana DAOs being really like on-chain based, which I think is really good. Like, I think if we're starting there, maybe it's initially more complicated. You need to like do more knowledge transfer and more hand-holding, but eventually it will all make us stronger, more secure.
But the thing is that once you decentralize and you open your DAO to the community, you really don't know the community, right? You don't know what's the participation rate, how many people are going to vote, are they going to vote, and there are like lots of risks that something goes wrong, you set the parameters wrong, you can lose everything, right? Everything the DAO owns, right? It is as serious, right? So because this is on chain, and if you cannot vote, you cannot pass proposal, it's all gone, right? And there is nothing that can be done. And there are dead DAOs like that on realms.
And that actually is.
There's no upside for you to be like restricted. You should be as low on quorum and low on proposal threshold in the beginning. The only thing that would ever influence it would be like legal, right? Like you find out that okay, this is sufficiently decentralized. The quorum is 50%.
Oh, that's an interesting question. Jose, that's a question for you. Like the voting quorum has any legal implications? Like, like this is too low. Like let's say you have like big DAO and like 2 people can make decisions. So that's interesting angle, right? That you have to think about it, that you cannot lower it too much. So what about roles then?
Committees or directorships for specific purposes, which are roles, the liability comes into the person.
Who has that role?
Imagine a normal company, you're the director, shareholders give you the resources, the money, and then you commit fraud. Are the shareholders liable? No, because it's a limited company. But you, as a director, if you took the money and ran away, you are liable. Or if you're just incompetent, sorry, you're not. On the contrary, the shareholders can kick you out because you're not achieving the results. So you are accountable for your personal. That's quite important. But we can assign sub-DAOs, because you can do directorships. Companies can be directors of other companies, which is the case. A DAO can be assigned a role of another bigger DAO or a different DAO. Exactly. That's super interesting.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to say that, kind of going back to the earlier point, that I think there is a good argument that we probably still need like an off-chain polling tool. If you're like already at the stage where you have the community, you're not really ready to like have a fully decentralized on-chain governance. Having like a kind of polling tool that allows you to do community voting without any kind of to get a sense of what they, where they're leaning towards, that would be, I think, really helpful. Just because I don't know if anybody is thinking about it.
Well, I think like almost all DAOs has this concept of soft governance and hard governance. When you have the off-chain forums when you discuss your proposals, and only once there is attraction and approval from the community, you go for the on-chain voting. So that's very common, because otherwise usually, if you have no chances of success, then there's really no point of starting the on-chain vote. But also something that you can do on SPL governance, you can create those poll-only proposals. So they are not executable. You don't attach any instructions. It's just asking for opinion, and that's like a very good way to test the community. And this is, I think, like the Imperium of Rain DAO, the pandas, Trust Pandas did, right? They created the DAO. They didn't put any assets into the DAO, and they were just testing the community, how many votes they could get, and kind of judge, what the quorum should be. That's you can experiment with that.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is, though, that you need the forums before you come to the on-chain voting. You need to be able to distinguish what's the vibe, is the community interested, is it participating, is the discussion fruitful enough and mature enough to go to an on-chain vote. And sometimes it can be that you cannot distinguish and clarify or distill the decision that goes to an on-chain vote before having the discussion in an open forum or a closed forum for the community.
Well, you can, but it will get very expensive, right? If you have to pay for every post, right?
It's going to become not feasible.
I guess this is it, no?
Hi. Super interesting. In the context of roles and hierarchy, I heard a lot of things where, without me being an expert, are already part of, I would say, political science, right? I think we need to be careful as a community to not try to reinvent the wheel. You mentioned, ancient Greece and Agora. These are things that have been evolving for thousands of years, or having a forum outside of the voting. I mean, these are things that are already in place. No proposal for a law goes on the floor without everybody basically knowing that it's going to go through. There are so many different aspects to it. And I'm just wondering if we have enough of this outside counsel from a political science that maybe can give us a lot of good hints of what has proven to work in a representational democracy versus direct democracy and all of these things. I'm not an expert, but there is really a science behind political science. So I was wondering if we as a community should reach out actively to bring these people in.
Well, there is one part to it which is about political sciences, and those are DAOs usually, and then there is corporate law, right? And it's completely different style of organization.
But your question is amazing. But the problem maybe is we are trying to disrupt the current democracy status. It's not really working that well if you're in the West creating 1%ers and 99%ers, and in the East, North Korea and China, social credit. So maybe we should question what these guys have been doing for 2,000 and something years.
But first we have to understand.
Absolutely. I agree with that. I agree with that.
I think it's very interesting that we're now talking about this in the context of corporate lawyers, political scientists, because in 2017, majority of DAO tooling builders and DAOs were influenced by, not by these guys, by protest movements, right? Aragon was inspired mostly, and they came out of that. And a lot of the guys that were kind of big in DAOs around that time, they were actually helping with, OWS, Occupy Wall Street, and some other. So we're kind of transitioning now to, because, again, protest movements is a movement. We're now getting to a more structural, well, it's okay, it's political science, corporate law. I imagine, it's interesting where we're going to be in a couple of years as well.
And this is exactly why in Athens, right? We are reinventing democracy, this time on chain.
Yeah, one thing that I just thought about right now, it would be nice to seek political science advocacy and councils, but good luck finding that and being able, as a DAO, to seek advice from political scientists and in the very early stages of the community. Because what you're trying is to self-organize towards a goal, either manage your assets, either evolve your community, either make your NFT very popular. So you don't, all these things are 3 times a full job to manage them in real life. So it would be nice to have a community that has a person with vast knowledge in political science, but we don't always have the luxury to have this.
Thank you. I definitely agree, and I don't see it at the level of an individual DAO. But, and this is just thoughts that I'm having now, but is creating your own governance in your DAO something similar to like engineers call like roll your own security? Is that something that actually should be done by each and every DAO because of all the risks and everything that we discussed? So there is a fine balance there between a DAO doing its own things and the risks that maybe it doesn't even know. And that's where things like the frameworks make sense. But I agree, it's not something that a small DAO that is trying to kickstart, you can find somebody. But maybe that's a big role of the frameworks.
Maybe it's a bit late, my comment, because move a bit further. I love Athens. It's a great place. I made them move here. But maybe the next one we create, the next event of DAO, yeah, we should go to Bilbao or Patagonia, where cooperatives or a kibbutz, because there are also other ways to organize human beings that we need to understand other ways. Really, I don't know, it's just a suggestion after I carry the Greek flag here. That's for sure.
Do you think that gets us to travel? Yeah.
I'm going to.
One thing that I was thinking about after this conversation and the one that we had this morning about legal was I kind of had this feeling after the conversation this morning, well, what are we going to do? You know, yeah, it's all doom and gloom, it's all shit, but what are we actually going to do about it? My background is in gaming. And we went through a process in 2015, 2016, 2017 that involved changing the law in American states to effectively legalize sports betting. And we changed the law in 22 different states. So it's possible, but it needs coordinated effort. And I was really left this morning with that feeling of, well, who's doing this? And what are we going to do? And I was wondering, you know, maybe we set up a DAO for, you know, Dean and Stepan and, you know, all the sort of core contributors to come together with lawyers where we all put money in and say, well, let's start those conversations now. Because our experience at FanDuel was you can try and have those conversations when you're small, but nobody takes the time, nobody's interested, nobody tries to understand what you're talking about. People are like, oh, it's just fantasy sports. We don't care. Go and do your draft or whatever. I don't care. And then it was only when we started spending hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising that the AGs stood up and went, oh, we're going to make some money out of these people, so let's talk about consumer protection and state taxes. And it was then that they wanted to have the conversations. So what can we be doing now while we're still small to put things in place to prepare for that?
Well, we need to check where Imon is, because he said, yeah, he wants to put together a DAO, right? That's going to be basically trying to define what we need. And that's definitely one of those things we need. And that's what we've been talking also like between us for several months now. We need a coordinated body basically within Solana platforms working on DAOs to actually streamline our efforts.
And Ethereum, like let's all
and Ethereum,
join
of
together.
Course.
The bigger, the better, right?
Yeah, Dean, please call Ethereum. Anyway, yeah, that's definitely one of the things we need to do.
That is the essence of our talk in the morning. Take action. We're still out of jail. We have to do it. We're late. We're late.
Stay out, you know,
Yeah.
you can prevent going into jail. Now
Yes.
no, do everything you can before they grab you.
Exactly.
Oh my God.
Exactly. But this is, we have to do it. Nobody else will do it.
Well, we feel incentivized here.
Yeah. Yeah. And at the end, spending millions in advertising is one way, but at the end, all the politicians want votes. if we can talk to the community and say, well, if you vote, if you do this, my community is gonna vote for you. It's not necessarily cutting corners, but it's a more direct route to everybody. And let's find where are the communities more sensible and say, hey, all of us, we need this, we need that. And here is very interesting place. Here's very interesting place.
Do you want to close it? We
Thank
can
you.
continue this conversation.
Yeah, let's go upstairs.
Thanks, everyone. This has been great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.